Bluetooth headphones, they are great, aren't they? Convenience, comfort, noise cancelling, and no pesky wires to get tangled up in. What's not to love? Well, there is the one little fact that they all rely on battery power, and that in the vast majority of cases, those batteries are not user replaceable, which means that inevitably your expensive Bluetooth headphones will end up becoming obsolete as the battery slowly loses capacity. Now compare that with wired headphones such as my HD 650s behind me, and those are celebrating their 20th birthday rather unbelievably, and you can see that sustainability of Bluetooth headphones is a real problem. Enter Fairphone, a company committed to selling ethical, repairable and sustainable electronics. As you might guess from the name, Fairphone are best known for their Android phones, all of which are user repairable and all of which feature upgradable components and replaceable batteries. Fairphone have clearly spotted a gap in the Bluetooth headphone market, and the Fairbuds XL is their first product. It's a slightly odd name because of course these are not buds, but full-sized cans. Retailing at £219, they undercut some of their big brand rivals while still promising to deliver high quality sound, noise cancellation and long battery life. All of this whilst also offering longevity through being completely repairable by the end user, i.e. you and me. So let's take a closer look at them. They come in boring black or the rather lurid green colour which I have here. In the box you get the cans themselves and this, a basic plastic bag made of recycled material actually. Now if you want a 3.5mm adapter cable, that's a very reasonable £11 extra, unlike Apple's extortionate £35 for the cable to go with the AirPods Max. Also, unlike the AirPods Max, you can use them completely passively with the wire if the battery runs out, which is a very attractive feature when you're on a long journey or something like that. The cans themselves are a little chunky and feel very plasticky, but they do feel solid and really well made, and reassuringly they're IP54 certified, meaning you can wear them out and about even in light rain. They even fold up like that for easy transportation. I mean, they're still quite bulky, but it's better than that. The plastics used in the construction are 80% recycled, and the tin and aluminium components are 100% recycled. Importantly, Fairphone say that the workers who assemble these headphones for you are paid what Fairphone calls a living wage. And also the minute amounts of gold that you do find in this device, like with all electronic devices, is 100% fair trade certified. Every single component of the Fairbuds XL is user replaceable and they're very easy to disassemble. There are lots of instruction videos on Fairphone's site, and Fairphone will be selling spares for very reasonable prices if their phones are anything to go by. So on the head they feel pretty comfortable, albeit slightly heavy. The ear cups are made of vegan leather here, and they're big enough to go around my ears. The clamp force is not too tight, but I did find my ears getting a bit hot and sweaty after about an hour or so of use. I really like the controls which are on the right ear cup. You only get two buttons here, one of which toggles the various noise cancelling modes, and the other is actually a neat little joystick. This is what you use to turn them on and off, play, pause, skip tracks and change the volume. It's a sturdy and tactile little button, and it's very easy to find and operate when they're on your head. And I do wonder why more manufacturers haven't gone for this style of control. It just makes sense. I think it's much better, for example, than the swipey touch controls on ear cups that you find on Sennheiser Momentum 4s and the Sony headphones. In terms of functionality, Bluetooth connectivity is via AAC or aptX HD if you're using a compatible source, and both of which are more than good enough in my opinion for listening on the go. Pairing them is very easy, and there is a nice little app on both iOS and Android which allows you to update the firmware and apply what Fairbuds calls 4 different sound profiles, which are all named after cities. There's no user adjustable EQ as such. I'll talk more about the sound profiles in a minute, we'll get to it. Now, battery charging is via USB-C, thank goodness, and a full charge takes just over 2 hours. Once charged, they will keep going for about 24 hours with ANC on, and actually more than 30 hours with ANC off, which is pretty reasonable, better than the AirPods Max, not quite as good as the Momentum 4s. So okay, we now get onto the important bit, which is of course the sound quality. Now I listen to these via both Bluetooth and wired connections from my Sony Xperia 1.4 and my FIO M11. Now recently I've been loving the Smashing Pumpkins' latest album. I think it's pronounced Autumn, ATUM. At 33 tracks, it's an absolute monster of an album, and although the quality is just a little bit uneven, there are some fantastic tracks on there. If you're a fan, you'll really love it. I've also just started listening to the Foo Fighters' new album, which came out yesterday. It's called But Here We Are. Now, it's their first album since the awful, tragic death of drummer Taylor Hawkins, who was just an all-round terrific guy. It's a raw, emotional record, as you might expect under the circumstances, but if early listening's anything to go by, I think it's also one of the best Foo albums, certainly their best in ages. So go check those out. So in terms of those sound profiles, to me the most pleasing one is the stock profile, which is called Amsterdam. It presents a V-shaped profile with a boosted bass, recessed mids, particularly the upper mids in my opinion, and also quite an elevated spicy treble. Now all the other sound profiles, 3 of them, are worse than the stock one in my opinion. One of them boosts the bass a little bit too much, the other makes the treble uncomfortably loud, and the 4th one didn't seem to do that much to me anyway. So I stuck with the stock Amsterdam profile, and it's not at all unpleasant. The bass is reasonable. It's not what I would term agile, nor is it particularly textured like the bass on the PX8s, for example. So if you listen to a track with a very agile bass line like Fool's Gold by the Stone Roses, you just don't get that rhythmic drive that that track demands. The mids are definitely recessed, particularly the upper mids, which makes female vocals in particular sound a little bit distant. It also makes orchestral classical music sound what I'd call a little bit hollow, with the main thrust of the upper mid-range instruments kind of smoothed out, toned down. Now the toned down upper mid-range does mean that these are completely non-fatiguing, and the extra spice in the treble doesn't lead to sibilance. In fact, it does improve a little bit with detail resolution. The downside of the elevated treble is that in some tracks, like on the Foo Fighters album, if there are cymbals, high percussion instruments, those can sound a little bit too strong in the mix. But overall, in terms of the frequency response, I'd rate them a B-. Now the technicalities are not great here. Soundstage is narrow, they're closed back, so you'd expect that, and the imaging is merely okay. Fairly standard for a closed back set of cans in this price range. Instrument timbre is generally good. None of the metallic tones you get from some headphones. The 40mm dynamic drivers do really well in this regard. The detail is a little bit lacking though, as is space around the instruments, and all this leads to a sound that feels very much congested and in your head and narrow, rather than the more expansive sound that you get with something like the, albeit much more expensive, Focal Batiste. So next we come on to noise cancelling. It's not great in my experience, although I need to qualify that a bit. It is quite good at eliminating constant low frequency noises such as rumbling engines, but it's really quite poor at reducing mid-range frequencies such as voices and the clatter of cups and spoons in a coffee shop. And that's a real shame, because that's where I tend to do a lot of my listening, and that's where something like the AirPods 2 actually are really good at cutting out ambient noise. Transparency mode is pretty good. Listening to announcements and such like in an airport would be very reasonable if you turn transparency mode on. I also listen to them switched off via the wired connections, just as a pair of passive headphones, and again they sound okay. They just sound like a fairly typical £100-ish pair of closed earphones, which is okay but not great. So sound-wise, these certainly don't sound as good as the Sennheiser Momentum 4s, although those are £70 more expensive. But listen, we're holding these to very high exacting audiophile standards, and that's clearly not what they're designed for. At their price point, there is no glaring issue here, and they are perfectly pleasant and listenable, particularly if you're out and about. I'll wager that most people will dig their sound for the price. It's completely inoffensive, and in fact I'd say it's pleasant. But let's face it, the main sell here is the fact that unlike even much more expensive Bluetooth headphones, you could potentially keep these going for years. You could buy the parts and replace them and they'd keep going perfectly fine. I think appealing to the more ethical electronics consumer is a masterstroke, and I wish more of the mainstream brands would put sustainability at the heart of their agenda. So all in all, it's a solid first effort from Fairphone and a most commendable product. If you're at all concerned about sustainability and you're willing to make a little bit of a compromise in terms of sound quality, then I would wholeheartedly recommend these. They're comfortable, they're well made, they sound good, and they make you feel good, which is really important. So those are my thoughts on the Fairphone XL. Let me know in the comment section below if you've managed to pick a pair up. If so, do you prefer the black or the rather lurid green? I'll stand by that statement. You know, it's always great to get your comments, and I love hearing from you. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, ding the like button, consider subscribing, all that kind of YouTuber stuff. I'll catch you in the next video.